Oh, hello and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to a relaxing afternoon at Chateau Clerbaud for another episode of Chateau Resurrection. Need to take it easy. I've had a hard 2 weeks, been lots of work going on here, and I've been editing this week's video, which has taken a lot of effort because it's a big one this week. It's all about the history and the lords and owners of the chateau going back 800 years. So something I've been wanting to do for a long time. It's taken a lot of planning. We're going to take you right back to the start of the chateau's history, to when it was first built, show you what it would have looked like then, who lived here, and we'll go through all the centuries, showing you all the people that have lived here, what they did, some very powerful people, some very interesting stories to tell, and we'll show you what has changed in the chateau over those 800 years. It's totally different from how it started out 800 years ago to how it is today. You wouldn't recognise it, not at all. We'll show you a lot of the surviving parts of the chateau that go back many centuries, and I hope you'll find it really interesting. If you like old buildings, if you like architecture, and you like history, then I think this episode is really going to be one for you. So please give us a like and also subscribe if you haven't already done so. There's a button in the bottom corner somewhere. And there's a very interesting connection with Chateau Clerbaud and the Eiffel Tower in Paris. So if you hang on to the end of the video, you'll find out just what that connection is. So I hope you enjoy it. It's quite a long one. Please stick to the end. There's a lot of interesting stuff in it. I think so anyway. Hope you enjoy it. See you next time. Thank you. Now I'm going back to my hammock for some more much needed rest. Hi everyone, today we've got a video that I'm very excited about. I've been working on it for quite a long time. I'm going to tell you all about the history of Chateau Clerbaud, which is a very long history, going back at least 800 years. Also going to tell you all about the owners and lords that have lived here over the centuries, and there are a great deal of them. So we'll start off with the Clerbaud family. The Clerbaud were wealthy knights serving under the barony of Montmillon. At some point they would have taken ownership of the land now known as the Parc de Clerbaud, and they would have built a castle, a fortress here. The castle that they would have built is very different to the chateau that we see here today. Back in the early 1200s, maybe late 1100s, when the castle was first built, there were strict rules about how you would build your chateau, your castle, essentially a fortress, and these rules were laid down by King Philip II of France. That meant that you had to have a curtain wall surrounding the fortress, you had to have defensive towers, you would have had a safe area, what in the UK we would call a keep, and what over here they call a donjon. So this would have been the fiefdom of the Clerbaud family, and a fiefdom was a land and area that you held on behalf of the king and swore loyalty to the king in return for that. The Clerbaud family can be traced back to around about 1060 in this area. It seems that they originally came from a place called Mortemer, which is just outside Poitiers, and over time they must have come towards this area here. No idea what the reason was, but presumably because they could get control of this land. There was a very powerful family in the Chauvigny region called the Senenbao family. And the first Clerbaud that we really come across in about 1260 is a young knight called Guy Clerbaud. And Guy was married to one of the daughters of the Senenbao family. As I say, the Senenbao were a very powerful family, and they owned other fortresses in this area. So for Guy to marry Lucy, the daughter, he must have been well thought of and quite a wealthy young knight. It would appear his father was also named Guy, and he named one of his sons Guy. So Guy seems to be a family name that was carried down throughout the generations. So what do we know of Guy Clerbaud and the Clerbaud family, and how long were they here at Chateau Clerbaud? Well, we know they were knights, they would have been lords of the manor, they would have exercised control within this area. The law in those days was basically by the sword, one of these things. You're expected to fight for your king. Now we know that the Clerbaud family were here in the 1200s, throughout the 1300s, and as we go into the 1400s, everything gets very vague. In fact, worse than vague, there's nothing at all, no records. Now that's not actually surprising, because that period of French history is the 100 Years' War. The 100 Years' War was a very turbulent period for nearly 100 years, mostly around the time of King Philip II of France. He was fighting internally with other regions of France, and he was also fighting with England. King John, King Richard, lots of disputes and battles going on throughout the decades. So it's hardly surprising that we don't find anything around that time relating to the Clerbaud family. They were almost certainly off fighting on behalf of the king. After the Battle of Poitiers in 1356, the English controlled most of the territory around here. So almost certainly they would have taken control of the chateau here at Clerbaud. Also during this period, we had what was known as the Black Death in Europe. This raged from about 1347 through to 1351. The Clerbaud family could have been affected by that. So as we know that Guy was the lord of this fiefdom in 1260, I think it's safe to assume that the chateau was actually built sometime before 1260, late 1100s, early 1200s possibly. So do we have an idea of just what the fortress would have looked like when it was first built? Well, actually we do. We have a couple of important pieces of information. One of these is a map or a plan of the estate dating to the early 1830s, which shows a number of buildings that are no longer here. And we also have a description of the chateau as it was in the year 1600. And that is pretty much how it would have been when it was first built. So from the 1600s description and a plan of 1836, we can pretty much draw out how the chateau would have looked when it was originally built. You will see it had a curtain wall going all the way around it, and there were many towers, one in each corner and some in the middle. There was gatehouses, fortified gates, entrances into the fortress, and we know the position of these. We know in the 1600s there were stables and there was a winery, so we have a pretty good idea of what the chateau has looked like over the years. We know that the Clerbaud family built the chateau, the fortress here, and we know that they were here from 1200s, certainly through into the 1300s, possibly even into the 1400s, but I think that's a little bit unlikely. Is there anything still surviving here within the chateau back to the time of Guy Clerbaud? Surprisingly, if you look, there is a great deal still here going back to that time. Many parts of the original fortress are actually still here. You just need to know where to find them. So let's go and take a look around the chateau at some of the areas where we can still see the remnants of the old fortress. Come with me. This is a part of the chateau that I'm pretty sure would have been the old keep or the donjon, the safe place where you could retreat to in times when you were being attacked. This wall here is very, very thick. This was an outside wall of the chateau. This was built for defence, and probably it was actually closed in. It wasn't a doorway or anything, and this was a separate part of the chateau here, and this was on the outside. If we walk further into this part of the chateau, we'll see another very old part. This looks like a doorway, but actually I think that it was an old stairwell, as it actually slopes upwards. It was actually closed off, it was filled in with stone. This was all plastered over, so this was actually hidden away. This was an outside wall. The wall has been obviously taken out. There was a door, which you can see in the ceiling here, the remnants of where there was actually a doorway here, some sort of opening. Perhaps might even have been a window at that height. But this would have been the second outside wall, and the one we just looked at down there, making this the two sides of the keep, the donjon. This we actually discovered by taking the plaster off this wall and realised that there was an old bricked up doorway here. So this again I think relates to the time of Guy Clerbaud and the very start of the fortress here at Paisley. We are now above the hallway where I was just standing a few minutes ago, and immediately beneath here is the old doorway we discovered, and here's a second doorway that we discovered. This second doorway is probably a similar age to the one downstairs, about 800 years. It's not very high because people in those days were much shorter. You can see the iron door hangers set into the stone at the top and the bottom where a big oak door would have been hung. On the other side there are some iron catches for locking the door. There are also some grooves cut into the stone, which I think would have been for even older locking mechanisms. And I'm sure that this old doorway here goes back to the very start of the first fortress here, to the time of Guy Clerbaud. This is a room which will become the reception area of the chateau. It's a room that we really haven't touched. It's dirty, dusty, just as we found it when we bought it. But one of the walls here, which I think dates back 800 years to when the castle was built, is this wall here. It extends about another half a metre that way and comes to here. So it's easily 1.8 metres wide. That is definitely a wall built for defence, so almost certainly one of the original walls of the castle from Guy Clerbaud's time. Now we're in the ground floor of one of the old towers at the back of the chateau. These definitely date to the building of the chateau. What all of these entrances are, not sure. This one I think was possibly a toilet that was added in 300-400 years ago when they first started having toilets put into buildings. This I think is an original doorway. It's curved. That would have gone into what is now the petit salon. Window, maybe a narrow slit, maybe not there, maybe been added at a much later date, but you can see the walls are very, very thick again, at least 1.5 meters. And over here, if we get down nice and low here, you can see these are the original foundations from the building of this tower. We dug all of this out when we were putting in the trench for the drainage. This actual part of the tower is going to be public toilets, all very interesting. So we had to dig it all out, and you can see the amazing foundations that were dug out, put in 800 years ago. Really done very solidly, really good quality. Now we are in the part of the chateau that when it was last inhabited, this was used as a kitchen. I think this room was actually an extension of the banqueting hall that we've just been into. And what we're looking at here, which I think is going to be pretty difficult for you to actually see, but this wall here, as it comes down, it's gradually tapering outwards. So it's wider here than it is at the top. What that normally would imply is that this is the base of a turret, where it's a bit wider at the bottom, narrows, and then goes straight up to the top of the turret. And from the description that I have from 1600, I know that somewhere about here, there was almost certainly a small turret. So I think this could be the remnants of it, the last surviving part of it. And out there is actually, now there's a modern concrete slab with a modern building tacked on the side, but that could have been on the old foundations of a turret that stood here. So if this is remains of a turret, that certainly dates back to the start of the chateau and the time of Guy Clerbaud. So this part of the chateau, dating to the time of Guy Clerbaud, yes, we're in the front garden of the chateau. I know from the document we have from the 1600s that there were defensive turrets or towers in this part of the front garden. And here we've got stones, and if you see, they look like they're going in a circle, and you can almost see a depression in the ground. Looks like there was something circular built here. There would have been a curtain wall as well, and if we come this way, and again you can see hopefully on the ground here there's a couple of stones. The wall would have got across that way. There were more buildings over there and another turret over there. So this probably is a part of the chateau that dates back to the 1200s. What I'd really like to do at a later date, when I can afford it, is to have some ground radar surveys done. That would show up where all of the old walls were, because the footings should still be in place. Where we are now is the old hall, a very old part of the chateau. You probably won't be able to see the outlines, but here there was an old door, and above as well you can just see the shadows of them. I'll be putting some photographs up that will show you exactly what I mean, because we opened this all up when we first came here to fix a big crack in the wall. And the fact that there's a door up there and a door down here makes me think that this building actually extended more in that direction. To the left is one of the old defensive towers, and if you look up at the window, or the windows there, you can see there have been so many alterations over the centuries. Different lintels in, bits have been filled in, different periods of stonework. So this tower certainly dates back to the 1200s. Perhaps there was an arrow slit, perhaps there was even a doorway there, perhaps there was this building extending here and it also extended out along there. For sure, lots and lots of changes over the centuries on this part of the tower. This doorway at the bottom, definitely much later. You can see that the stone is much newer. Now we're in the back garden, at the back of the chateau obviously, and behind me now we can see the wall, the back wall of the chateau. This wall tells lots of stories. The windows, originally in the 1200s there wouldn't have been any windows here at all. Probably just arrow slits for firing arrows out of. And that is how it would have looked to Guy Clerbaud in the 1200s. This wall that's up here behind me now is probably one of the most revealing and oldest in the chateau. We're in the attic area above what was most likely the old hall, and there seems to be evidence of a much lower roof line and maybe some roof beams, some holes in the wall. There's almost a line that you can sort of see that comes down here, one that probably went across there. A different roof, lower pitch, not as high. Who knows? I guess we'll never know, but that's how it sort of appears to me looking at it now. There's a door of some description here, I believe. I have even wondered if it could at one point have been a fireplace. Was there maybe a chimney that went up through there? But this wall could be one of the very oldest in the chateau, dating back to the time of Guy Clerbaud, the early 1200s, when the chateau was first built. Where I am now is right at the top of one of the old towers at the back of the chateau. This old fireplace here, I think is stone. I've chipped a bit of the plaster off and there's definitely stone under there. Whether it's all stone, I don't know. At some point I have to uncover it. Probably I'm going to do that by videoing it so we can share the surprise together. And the window here with the steps up to it, which I suspect was maybe for bringing things up through the window and you needed steps to get to it. Maybe it was an old archer slot, an arrow slot where you would shoot arrows out. But certainly this little room at the top of this tower is one of the most untouched parts of the chateau that's still existing. Tucked away in this corner of the attic is an old wall that it took me quite a while before I noticed it. And you kind of have to work your way through here. But then when you see it, it's a very, very thick wall. Obviously built as a main wall, possibly for defence as well. Could be an original part of the old fortress. So what happened here at Chateau Clerbaud after the Clerbaud family had gone? At the end of the 1400s, we find a new Lord of Clairbaudieres. His name is René de Graham. The de Graham family originally hailed from Scotland, where they came from the illustrious House of Graham, a powerful Scottish family. In the 1400s, they had settled in the Normandy region before one branch of the family had moved down towards Touraine and Poitou regions. And ultimately, one part of that family also became lords here at Clerbaud. We have no idea how they acquired the castle, but certainly from the mid to late 1400s, they were here. The de Grahams were wealthy. Whilst here at Chateau Clerbaud, they spent quite a bit of money. We can see a lot of changes that were done around about late 1400s, early 1500s, and we're going to go and have a look at some of those in a few minutes. We can assume, as we're now at the end of the 100 Years' War, that the chateau is probably in quite poor repair. There's probably been change of control, change of ownership, there's been fighting, there's been battles, there's probably lots of damage, and the de Graham family take over and set about updating and repairing the fortress. We're going to go and look at a few areas where we can see just what they did, and we've been able to identify the timings because of dendrodating on some of the timbers. By taking timber samples, we can have them analysed, and that will give us an approximate and sometimes an exact time of when that piece of timber was actually felled and used within the chateau. Really useful information. René de Graham had a son called Martin, and that Martin in turn had a son who he also called Martin. And the second Martin de Graham, he was Lord of Clerbaud in about 1550. Then it seems to get not really confusing, but we have another family shown as Lords of Clerbaud, and that's the de Drac family. But the de Drac family seemed to be related to the de Graham family, certainly by marriage. The de Drac family were a very powerful family. Many members of the family held high political posts. In 1413, Jean de Drac was the president of the Parliament of Paris, and it is from him that Charles de Drac is descended. Charles de Drac was shown as Lord of Clerbaud in the early to mid 1500s. The de Drac family were here at Clerbaud for the next 150 years. The final member of the family to be Lord of Clerbaud was Sylvain de Drac. He held a very high office as Gentleman of the King's Chamber. This was a very powerful position in France. Throughout his life, he held many other powerful political positions, but he died without any male heirs, just a daughter. So why don't we go and have a look around the chateau and see what remains from the early 1400s through to the mid 1600s, the time of the de Graham and de Drac families. Come with me, let's go. This lovely oak beam ceiling in this part of the chateau has an interesting story to tell. Originally, this ceiling was a lot higher and it was brought down. I had one of the beams dendrodated and found that it was cut down in the summer of 1413, so over 600 years ago, which leads me to believe that the ceiling was actually lowered round about the early 1400s. Why it would have been lowered, I've no idea. That would have been the middle of the 100 Years' War, so maybe they were doing some changes, refortifying, maybe there was damage. Can only guess at that, but certainly we know that this was a lot higher at one point. This door here, which we see is really just a little bit taller than I can reach. If we go into the Petit Saloon on the other side of this, we'll see the door opening is much, much higher. When we go upstairs as well, there's some other clues that show us that this ceiling has been brought down. We are now above the hallway where I was just standing a few minutes ago, and immediately beneath here is the old doorway we discovered, and here's a second doorway that we discovered. Again, this was all bricked in, closed in, covered with plaster, so it was only when we took the plaster over we found this old door. Initially we started to think it was a window because it's above the floor level, but as I said, we know that this floor here would have been higher, about 1 metre higher, and then suddenly the door actually fits. And we know that it's a door because there's a catch and hinge and everything here where a door would have locked into place here. Not very tall. People in those days are much, much shorter, and I'm sure that this old doorway here goes back to the very start of the first fortress here. Another clue that the floor in this room was about 1 metre higher is the doorway over here. Now, the current doorway closes about here, but this has been added. So you can see that originally the doorway, the top of the doorway, was much, much higher. It seems a crazy, crazy high doorway. But if we imagine that the floor was about 1 metre higher to about this level, then suddenly the door becomes a normal sized door again. We enter the old kitchens through this ancient oak door, which is at least 500 years old. So this hall, which I call a banqueting hall, I'm not sure whether it's an original part of the chateau or it perhaps dates to the 1500s. I've always thought that it's probably from the original part of the chateau, that it was an old kitchen, sleeping area, animals in here. The only thing that makes me wonder if it does date back to the 1200s is the thickness of the walls. The walls are not particularly thick. There again, I know that this part of the building where the walls are very thick, perhaps that was the main defensive part, and this was added on as a kitchen. There was no need to defend it perhaps, so they built the walls a little bit thinner. The floor, I think, the cobble floor, dates from probably the 1500s. The fireplace is much, much more recent. Originally there would have been a much bigger, wider fireplace, which you can see here. And here, where there's this little opening, that actually was originally a door, and it was changed and a window was put in. So certainly this part of the chateau dates to at least the 1500s and probably a little bit before that. Ought to get the beams dendrodated, then that might give us a clearer idea. Something that was definitely changed over here is this stone wall was almost certainly a later addition. You can see the beam running across the top of the stone wall. If you had a beam, you wouldn't need the stone wall underneath it. So this leads me to think that the beam is older and was originally holding up the ceiling, and at some point the stone wall has been added underneath it. Perhaps in the 1500s, but I'm pretty sure that's when the stone floor was put down. Now we're at the end of the old hallway downstairs, standing by the stone staircase. I think this stone staircase dates to the 1500s, probably then put in by the Graham family. The reason that I estimate that date is that the staircase lines up with the upstairs hallway, which is one that we know where the floor was lowered, and that lowered floor lines up with this stone staircase. So with that floor being put in early 1400s probably, the staircase had to be put in at that time or after, because it lines up with the floor level. When we bought the chateau, these beautiful stone stairs were covered with a heavy oak staircase, which had actually been nailed in to the stonework. And you can see the cracks and the holes here. This is because when they nailed the new staircase on top, they actually split the stone. They were banging wrought iron, handmade nails into it. We've had to reinforce all of these steps with rebar. We've put nearly 40 meters of rebar to support the stone stairs, and we're now in the process of restoring them. Where we are here is in the front tower, right at the very top of the front tower on the 3rd floor of the chateau. What we're looking at is these old roof beams here. Now, what you might be thinking is, why are there roof beams when we're actually inside? I had these beams dendrodated, and they date to the late 1400s, early 1500s. So we know this roof was put in around about 1500. Would have been put in by the Graham family, but why are they inside the chateau? But if you imagine that this tower is actually round originally, and the tower would have come around here, then the roof beams are outside the tower, When they modernised it, made it more fashionable, made it sort of hexagonal or whatever it is at the front, they would have extended this out, and then these roof beams would have ended up inside the chateau. And you can see they all came down here, and we cut this one off and sent it off to be dated. So this little piece of wood here tells me that originally the tower was round and a new roof was put on about 1500. Certainly by the de Graham family. That was right at the end of the 100 Years' War. So was there damage? Had the roof been destroyed, or was it just old? But for whatever reason, new roof, 1500-ish. Now we've come back down from the top of the tower. We're now standing at the bottom of the tower and obviously on the outside of it. This tower has puzzled me, intrigued me, trying to get an idea of just when it was built and who built it and when it was altered, because it's certainly been altered over the years. And what I've come down to at the end is just logic. As we just saw, the old roof beams suggested a new roof was put on around about 1500, and there must have been a round tower existing at that point. So the tower has been changed from a round tower to the hexagonal tower that we see before us today. The question is, when was that changed? The original round tower would almost certainly have been built at the start of the 1400s, because it incorporated the stone staircase which lines up with the floor, which was dropped in around about 1400, early 1400s. So we can be pretty sure that the round tower was built round about then. When was the tower modified? What clues do we have? Most of the clues relate to the door. The actual hexagonal style of the tower also gives us a clue. That style is pretty much late Renaissance. The steep pyramidal roof is also classic late Renaissance. That gives us a further clue. Let's have a closer look at the door and the portico and see just what that tells us. So what can the door show us? The triangular pediment, that is classic provincial Renaissance style, around about 1580 to 1650. The door jambs on either side, the pilaster door jambs, again very much Renaissance, late Renaissance style. And if we look at the three ball finials on the top, very, very common late Renaissance style. Another big clue to the date of this doorway and the tower is the door itself. It has linen fold decoration on it, hand carved linen fold on the bottom wood panels here. The little half sun motifs that we see carved in here, again, that is a classic Renaissance style. Whilst I don't really know who built the tower in the 1400s, because there aren't really any records, I'm pretty sure I know which family altered it in the 1500s. And that is because of these three little shells here. The shells are a motif of the heraldic shield of the de Graham family. And we know the de Graham family was here in the early 1500s and again in the late 16, early 1700s. But this whole style is definitely not late 16, early 1700s. This is definitely Renaissance. So we can say that the de Graham family built this portico, changed the look of the tower, modernized it all, 1500s almost certainly. The wall, the back wall of the chateau. This wall tells lots of stories. The windows, probably in the 1500s, they'd have put smaller windows in. If you see the little window in the middle, it's all been blocked up. I would imagine that there were probably three of those. That's the middle one, and one to the left, one to the right. Glass windows were becoming affordable in the early 1500s, and I guess that the de Graham family wanted to improve the look of the old fortress walls. Now let's head around to the front garden and take a look at something that definitely comes from the time of the de Graham family, 14 to 1500s. The round tower behind me, that's a pigeonniere built to keep pigeons in The lord of the manor, he was allowed to keep pigeons. Nobody else is allowed to keep pigeons. Probably built in the late 1400s, early 1500s by the de Graham family. I know it's not an original part of the old chateau. The thickness of the walls gives that away. If it was built in the 1200s, the walls would have been much thicker because it would have been built for defence. These walls are not really that thick at all. Definitely built as a pigeonaire. Let's go and have a quick look inside. Originally, all of these walls would have been covered with small holes where the pigeons would nest. I'm sure when we take the render off, we'll find all of these holes still there. By 1600, the old fortress of Clerbaud had seen some changes and improvements. I have a document from 1617 in which Pierre du Drac, Lord of Clerbaud, makes his declaration to the king and describes the chateau. Let's listen to Pierre describe the chateau as it was in 1617.
All know that I, Pierre du Drac, squire, lord of Maze and of the Clerbaud, firstly declare that my said house, land, fief and lordship of the Clerbaud is held to the faith and homage of the king our lord. It is located in the parish of Pays-le-Sec and consists of a large main building with a gatehouse and 2 towers at the back serving as bedrooms and storerooms and defence to said dwelling composed of hall, kitchen, lower rooms and as many above them with attics. There are 2 small walled courtyards in front of and behind the said dwelling. The courtyards with turrets to serve as defences. In one courtyard there is a bread oven, stables and laundry tub with a ditch at the back of said courtyard. The said buildings and courtyards are 3 bushels or thereabouts. Plus my large farmyard enclosed by walls, containing 8 bushels or thereabouts in which there is a gatehouse, which is the entrance, furnished with an upper room and next to it a low house for the bourdier. The said farmyard is furnished with a pigeonaire, barn, large stables and small ones with 2 small towers at the corners to serve as defences. Plus my garden, adjoining the back of my said house, which is enclosed by walls and ditches containing 4 or 5 bushels of earth, or thereabouts adjoining my vineyard and my parklands and my large wood.
From this description of 1617, we know that the curtain wall still surrounds the chateau, and that the turrets and towers are still in place. The gatehouses are still there, and the pigeonaire has now been built, as have stables and barns. So I hope you enjoyed that little look around the chateau. Now we're going to go forward to the late 1600s, which is the time when this table that I'm sitting at was actually made. And in 1695, we have a new Lord of Clerbaud, Gabriel de Graham. Yes, the de Graham family are back, which enforces, in my opinion, the fact that the de Drac and the de Graham family were connected. The chateau passed from de Graham family to de Drac, and later it passed from de Drac back to de Graham. So I'm sure there is a connection there. And as in the 1500s, immediately the de Graham family start spending a lot of money on the chateau. They start making lots of renovations, really modernising it. As we move into the 1700s, throughout the chateau, there are many places where we can see dates carved into timber, into stone, and we can see the improvements that the de Graham family were once again making to the chateau here. This later branch of the de Graham family all seem to hold high positions in the French military. Gabriel de Graham, who was the Lord of Clerbaud in the very late 1600s, he was a captain in the army, and his son, Louis Prosper de Graham, rose to the rank of brigadier, and he was a knight of the Order of St. Louis. Louis Prosper de Graham had a son named Alexander Prosper de Graham. He was also in the military in the French Guards. The de Graham family stayed as Lords of Clerbaud right up until the late 1700s, until the time of the French Revolution. A revolution that brought huge problems for the nobility of France. At the time of the French Revolution, Alexander Prosper de Graham had risen to the rank of colonel in the French Guards. Alexander wanted nothing to do with the revolution, and he left France, not returning until after the restoration of the monarchy. After the restoration, Alexander returned to service, and in 1816 he was appointed provost of this area of Vienne. It's not been clear whether Alexander Prosper de Graham still continued as a Lord of Clerbaud after the French Revolution. I did read somewhere that the de Graham family continued to own the chateau here right up until the late 1800s, but I have been checking the census records and I cannot find any proof of this. The first census records show Jean-Francis Alexandre Bouquet at the chateau in 1836. When he dies in 1863, his wife, Louise Hélène Colin, continues to live at the chateau until her death in 1874. Then I found her nephew, Paul Louis Albert Colin, living there with his wife. I can find no connection between the de Graham family and the Bouquet and Colin families. I still need to investigate more into what was happening here during the French Revolution, but I was told by one historian who had researched the area that during the French Revolution the chateau was actually used as some kind of storage place. There are many areas in the chateau showing the work of the de Graham family in the 1700s. So why don't we go and take a look at some of these now. We are on the first floor of the Eastern Tower Room, looking at a mantel with a mirror and carved decoration. You can see the shell above the face. This shell is a heraldic device of the de Graham family. The carving style is mid-1700s, which suggests that we are looking at the face of Louis Prosper de Graham. This makes sense as most of the dates carved inside the chateau are from his time as Lord of Clerbaud. Amazing to see him looking at us through the centuries. This wooden staircase, was put in by the de Graham family in the 1700s. Not the white balustrades, that they were put in by us, we put those in last year, but the actual main frame of the staircase dates back to the 1700s. Now we're in the back garden, at the back of the chateau obviously, and the Graham family, when they came back again, certainly they put in the bigger windows, because you can see the date of 1710 on the lintel of the window to the left of the one that's been blocked up. All done purely for fashion, for what was in taste at the time. So that's how we can see 800 years of history all in just one wall. Now we are in the front courtyard of the chateau. The French provisional dormer windows have a classical Baroque influence, so they're probably dating to around 1680 to 1730, making them a de Graham addition to the chateau. In the banqueting hall of the chateau, we find a pillar that has been put in to support a cracked roof beam. It's dated 1769. Then on the ground floor of the west wing, in what was probably the old keep, we removed some plaster from an old oak beam and discovered a date of 1740 had been carved. The artisan who covered the beam with plaster must have carved that date, just as artisans still do today. Both of these dates fit into the time when Louis Prosper de Graham was Lord of Clerbaud. The census records from 1881 onwards show the Trouvé family living here at the chateau. And the Trouvé family were the last family to actually live here in the chateau. They sold the chateau in 2000, and since that date it has not been inhabited. Finally, let's have a look around the chateau and see what improvements were made during the 1800s. The whole middle wing of the chateau has a mansarde roof. It was very popular in the mid to late 1800s because it gave extra roof height in the attic, which allowed more living space. This roof was fitted in 1855 by Jean-Francois Bouquet, and I know this because one of the finials is signed and dated. It is still in really good condition to this day. Another late 1800s addition to the chateau were these French Baroque style windows. They have a slight influence from the Second Empire, which dates them to the mid to late 1800s. I suspect these beautiful cast iron windows were put in by the Trouvé family. They certainly date to the late 1800s. Behind me you can see the Bollé wind turbine. That was put in the late 1800s, would have been put in by the Trouvé family, the last family to actually live here at Clerbaud. Reason for it was it's built above the well, which is probably a very old well. Certainly goes very deep, 30-40 meters at least, because I put a rope down there and measured it. And it would pump the water up from the well, and then it would take it to the water tower that's actually on top of the old pigeon air that we were looking at earlier on. Apparently there are only about 10 of these Bollé windmills still existing in the whole of France. Let's have a quick look inside here at the pumping machinery. And now you can see the metal water tower on top of the old pigeon there. Not sure I would have liked to have drunk water from that. Now we're at the very top of the chateau in the attic. What you are looking at is the remains of a hydraulic lift that was put into the chateau by Félix Edou, who is the inventor of the hydraulic lift. Edou came from the next village to here, and he studied at the prestigious École Centrale in Paris. He devised a hydraulic lifting system powered by water pressure and patented it in 1864. His most famous achievement was designing the elevator that connected the second level of the Eiffel Tower to its summit. Commissioned by Gustave Eiffel, the elevator entered service when the tower opened in 1889 and remained in operation until 1893. So here we are, back in the old hallway downstairs, standing in the gap in the old original wall. But what we're coming to look at here from the 1800s is this beautiful mosaic floor. This would have been put in the late 1800s, probably 1870 to 1890, and it would have been put in by the Clerbaud family, the last family to actually live in the chateau. I know it was put in at that time because friends of mine have a chateau 15 minutes away from here, and their chateau was built in the late 1800s, and it has almost identical mosaic designs in that chateau. So possibly even done by the same guy that did that. The mosaic extends all the way through the hallway downstairs. We plan to have it flattened and repolished and waxed, and then it's going to look really beautiful. So let's see what's changed to the fabric of the chateau since the early 1600s to the 1830s. You'll see that the curtain wall has gone, the gatehouses have gone, nearly all of the towers have disappeared, and there are no longer any buildings in the back garden of the chateau. So I hope you've all enjoyed our little journey through the centuries, looking at the different families that have lived here, seeing what they've actually done to the chateau over the centuries. I'm totally fascinated about the history of this place, and I love exploring and finding out more. The building is constantly telling me little stories from the past, revealing its secrets, and I hope you've enjoyed this journey over the centuries, meeting the Clerbaud family, the knights from the 1200s, the Graham family who spent a lot of money here the 2 times that they were here, a family with great military pedigree, the Drac family, political family, very powerful in France, living here, and finally the Clerbaud family who brought us right up to modern times. Thank you for joining us on this journey today, and please give us a like because that helps, and also if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you for following us, and see you next time.